Welcome to Cinemaholics. I'm John Magaro. Today we're thrilled to talk about September 5, a powerful and thought-provoking film that takes an unflinching look at the intersection of media, truth, and the gray areas in between. Set over the course of a single day during the 1972 Munich Olympics, September 5 weaves a thrilling story about the ABC newsroom that was thrust into an unprecedented hostage situation that would go on to become the first live broadcast of an ongoing terrorist attack. We follow several employees of the control room trying to navigate this high-stakes drama, with their most intimate decisions playing out under the unrelenting spotlight of the news media. The film doesn't just tell a story, it holds up a mirror to our current times, challenging how we view the ethics of live coverage, media accountability, and the influence of public narratives on private perspectives. Directed by Tim Fehlbaum and brought to life by a stunning performance from John Magaro, September 5 premiered to critical acclaim at this year's Venice Film Festival. Critics have lauded its nuanced take on how the media amplifies and distorts the personal stakes of ordinary people and has sparked important conversations about the power of storytelling in shaping our realities. Today, I am so happy to be joined by Tim Fehlbaum and John Magaro as we dive into the creative process behind the film, which is approaching its limited release later this month. Tim, John, thank you so much for being here and taking the time.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you for this wonderful introduction, by the way. I thought you really nicely right on point what the film is about.
Yeah, we don't even have to talk about anything now. It's all, it's right there. Yeah.
To be honest, I do have so many questions because after watching the film last week, I think the obvious commentary that people are going to have is that, yes, this is a timely film, quote, timely. A lot of people don't really have as much trust in the media as they used to. Was that something that was at the front of your mind when you were making the film? I know you were making it a while back, so a little bit of a different time.
I don't know if that was on the front of the mind. I just was generally very interested in that turning point in media history that day was, and I didn't know that before. There was one conversation that we had that with Jeffrey Mason, that's a character that John plays, and he was there as a 20-year-old rookie in the control room of ABC Sport, working for ABC Sports, and he was there during this 22-hour marathon of broadcasting when they had to make that switch from reporting on the Olympics to reporting on this crisis. And as we got deeper into research, we learned how, one of the things that you just mentioned, that it was actually from our research the first time that an act like this was on live television.
So you didn't know that before you were actually...
I mean, this is things that you find out when you do more
right.
research. Also, and another fact is that it's interesting that even before this tragedy happened, from a media point of view, the Summer Olympics were a big game changer because it was, first of all, it was the first Olympics that could be broadcast globally live via satellite. And it was the first Olympics on German soil since 1936, which was misused by Hitler for his fascist propaganda. And for these Olympics, Germany wanted to send out a new image to the world, the one of the liberal Germany. The one, they always wanted to have a, let's say, hippie-ish vibe in the Olympic Village. That's also why they didn't have any armed police, which proved to be a little bit of a problem later, because they didn't want to harm that image in any way. And to send out that image, they have set up this never-before-seen technical apparatus. The satellites, but also, for example, it was the first time that the venues were designed for optimal TV coverage.
Right.
And they had cameras everywhere. And then suddenly this whole apparatus had to switch from Olympics to this tragedy. And this is something that we were interested in. And, to get back to your question, did we think about how it reflects on how we consume media today? I think when making it, you shouldn't feel think too much about it. It's there anyway, right? By being as accurate as possible to the historic facts, it automatically has an influence on or it feels relevant also for today.
Yeah. John, he mentioned Jeffrey Mason, the character you play, and I understand that you actually got to meet him, in preparation for this film. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was very important to talk to Jeff. That was during COVID, and he lives in Florida. I'm in New York, so we were only able to talk over the phone and over Zoom, but those conversations were enormously helpful. I know that I couldn't have done this without those conversations. Primarily what we discussed was just what he went through on that day. And those stories are really what inspired Tim to tell this story in this specific way. I mean, Tim can talk about this more, but there were a few ideas about how to approach this, and it wasn't until they spoke to Jeff Mason that him and Moritz, our other writer, settled on telling it from the sports broadcast perspective, seeing the uniqueness of that sort of way of telling this story. Never had been done before. Jeff made it really clear to me that on that day, they really had no time to think. They were just doing their job in the best way that they knew how. And that's to say they didn't really know how. This had never been done before, and they weren't news reporters, they were sports broadcasters. But beyond that, Jeff was also extremely helpful in so many other ways for the entire production. He got Tim and I into control rooms, which became a very important part of my research, learning how to be a director and a producer in a sports control room. And he also, in a large part, is the reason we got the footage that we use in the film of Jim McKay. It was because of his reverence in the sports broadcast community that ABC and Bob Iger at Disney were willing to release those tapes to us.
Right, like that's actually Jim McKay, right? Like
Yes.
the real footage. And yeah, because I was really curious about when you're trying to tell a story like this, it must be so difficult to preserve the authenticity, but to also tell a story that makes sense for a film, right? How do you even strike that balance?
Yeah, that's an act of balance, as you say, that we were confronted with in every stage of making this movie. That's what you discuss already when writing the script, then when shooting every day, and of course, especially then also in editing, like how, and our ambition was always to try to stay as close as possible to reality. And for that, we had made as much research as possible. And we also, especially, we briefly talked about this in a way at the beginning, since this is also a movie about technology and also about how technology changes the world in a way, in that sense that it changes the media, and in that sense also changes how we see the world, right? Or see news. We wanted that whole technical apparatus to be portrayed as authentically as possible. But then, as you say, we're not making a documentary. It's still a feature film. We're telling events that in reality spanned over 22 hours within 90 minutes. We have, for example, combined John's character, Jeffrey Mason, is also a combination of certain roles that in real life several people had. So that's what you do. But yeah, in a way, the movie should feel real. That was really important to us.
Yeah, the spirit of it, of course. And the point that you're trying to make, of course, is based in the accuracy of the moment. And John, I can't even imagine, if your character is this amalgamation of several different real people, that has to be such a huge challenge to still have a consistent performance that doesn't stray from, what you started with.
Well, I mean, at the heart of it is Jeff Mason. The character, the personality, the traits are there as Jeff Mason. Jeff was a young producer on the ground who wanted to impress people, who was, inexperienced, who had been thrown into kind of the deep end on that day. And he did rise to the challenge and was very innovative and creative on that day. And it really launched his career. The other components are more technical. We're talking about a director's role versus a producer's role, which kind of work in tandem in a sports broadcast room. So that was, because it was more technical, it wasn't necessarily about, besides just knowing how to do those functions, they weren't as important in the portrayal. They were just, I've been equating it to learning an instrument. It was like learning an instrument, how to call a sports broadcast or any live programming. So the technicality of that is sort of apart or aside from the human element, which was primarily Jeff Mason.
This is also a movie where you see people in their professional environment. So that was our primary focus also, right? The idea was that when you see these people, that it feels like really they know what they're doing. So that's what John studied a lot in these control rooms. Like, how do these directors of live TV shows, they have a very specific way of Yeah, as he said, like almost conducting an orchestra when giving the directions to which cameras to cut to or things like that.
All right, guys. Well, I really appreciate it. I think that's
Already.
Yeah, it was very quick.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give you guys a break, of course, and can't thank you enough for making the time
No,
for the
thank
Bay
you for
Area Press
talking to
today.
us. I
We're
appreciate it.
happy to have you here in the Bay.
I
hope you
love
have a
it.
good time.
I've been saying I wish we had more time here. It's such a
Maybe one last thing.
lovely
like,
place.
Since we're in San Francisco, there's a movie that was a big inspiration for our movie, The Conversation.
There you go. Nice little tease.
And also, that we were talking earlier today about the '89 World Series, where a sports team had to pivot and cover tragedy as the earthquake unfolded here and the bridge collapsed. Yeah, so that's very, very similar.
We're just going to continue talking. You can pack up. No, thank you.